All right, welcome everybody to the 2026 Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund webinar Q&A. My name is Jessica Lewis. I'm a community projects manager at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We also have Maya Burke here, who is our assistant director here at TBEP. And if you're here today, hopefully that means you're going to be submitting a Environmental Restoration Fund proposal. I will say TBERF for the rest of the time, so I don't have to say that mouthful the whole time. So let's go ahead and get started. Today, I hope you will come away with an understanding of who's eligible for TBERF, what types of projects are considered competitive, and how to submit the best possible proposal this year. So please put your questions in the chat or hold them until the end. And if you'd like to stay off camera, otherwise you're going to be on our YouTube forever, and also stay on mute until the end when it's time for questions. So before we jump fully in, if you have applied for TREF before, I want you to put like an exclamation point in the chat. And this is just for my benefit, so I know who's doing what. If you've never applied for TBERF, put a minus sign in the chat. Cool. Okay, so this is our agenda. We will have about 20 or 30 minutes for questions at the end. And as I mentioned, if you want to put questions in the chat, feel free or just hold them till the end. All of the documents that we are going to reference today are on the Tampa Bay Estuary Program website. Maya's going to put the TBERF landing page link, which you've probably all seen since you registered for this webinar, but just as a reminder. And let's jump into some background information on the TBERF program. So this is a public-private partnership. Funding is pulled from many different contributors, large and small. Some of them you see here, and there are others. TBERF is also managed by us here at the Estuary Program, and this is the 14th year of TBERF. So we will hit $10 million in project funding and over 100 projects this year. So we're actually having a big celebration in June. So keep that on your radar for when I send out the save the date. So this is the important stuff. So TBERF is a deliverable-based fixed cost reimbursement style grant. Projects have to be completed within 3 years. They fall into one of four types of projects generally. On the ground habitat restoration or conceptual planning, water quality improvement projects, research and monitoring with a clear application for resource managers, or evidence-based social marketing campaigns that encourage pro-environmental behaviors within the community. Habitat restoration and water quality improvement projects really are sort of the meat and potatoes of TBERF, so keep that in mind. Projects typically award between $25,000 to $250,000 per project, although there is no official award ceiling, so you are welcome to submit an application for a higher amount than $250,000. There will be approximately $800,000 made available for TBERF for 2026. As a sort of reference point, awards for restoration or construction projects tend to range between $100,000 to $200,000 per project, while applied research projects tend to range between $50,000 to $100,000. So that's just some reference point for yourself. TBERF projects must provide a direct benefit to the environment, to the resources, or the community within Tampa Bay watershed. That benefit must also be measurable in some way. These are called measurable benefits within the RFP, and we'll talk more about that later. So whether that be 100 acres of habitat restoration or 40 acres of stormwater treatment or whatever it is, we'll dive into that a little bit later. But think about how your project will improve the watershed. For now, I'm going to ask Maya to put the Tampa Bay watershed boundary website into the chat so you can explore that as needed. So that measurable benefit for the watershed that I just described must also be identified in one of these publications. The actions and goals that are laid out in this comprehensive conservation and management plan for Tampa Bay and the Habitat Master Plan are pretty extensive. Both of these publications are available on the website. Maya will put that in the chat for you as well. But keep in mind, it's got to benefit the watershed and it's got to be something identified in this Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan, or CCMP for short, or the Habitat Master Plan. Who can apply? Projects must be led by government entities, nonprofit organizations, or academic institutions. So, although private consultants and individuals, businesses cannot apply to TBERF as a lead organization, you're absolutely encouraged to partner with eligible organizations as members of their project team. There's no restriction on who can be on the project team, and later we'll talk about how having a diverse and relevant team will help your proposal score in the end too. We'll spend some time here going over how to apply before we get to the evaluation criteria, just so you know what documents I'm going to be talking about later when I refer to them. So let's talk about how to apply. First thing you want to do is read all of the information that's available to you in the RFP. I want to point out that your proposal will be submitted through the online portal. You'll complete your proposal in advance and submit it online this way. Just like sending an email, you can't make changes after you submit the proposal. But unlike an email, you cannot start an application and then come back later to finish it. So just make sure everything is ready when you go to submit your proposal. You will complete it in advance and copy a few things into the portal there and then include your attachments. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Make sure you leave yourself plenty of time for this, because if you wait until 20 minutes before the deadline, there will inevitably be a problem. Your internet will go down, and we do not accept late submissions. So please don't wait until the last minute. But if you do have a problem when you're submitting, give me a call and we'll figure it out together. This year's proposal format is a little different, kind of the same but different. It really is only 2 required documents. So your cover letter should indicate your authority to apply for the grant. This will likely be written and signed by your director or chair, whoever is higher up in your organization. And it should at least include the project title, in your cover letter. The other required document is the scope of work. There is a template for this. The template is required, and the template is a little different this year from past years. So let's take a look at that. I've got a little video here because I don't trust the internet sometimes. So let's talk about it. This is the RFP, which no doubt you have seen. So I'm just scrolling through this in the video all the way to the end. And then you can see how at the bottom there, the little scope of work button pops up. You can access it that way or over there in the document tabs section. Can everyone see the video playing? Just double checking. Okay, cool. So this is the scope of work template that you'll use. Notice the instructions here. You're going to download this document, edit it yourself, and this is what you'll turn in when it's finalized. I've got a bunch of different italicized text in this document that you're going to replace and put your own information there. So just make sure you're answering all the questions, you don't miss anything. Pay attention to all the different instructions that are in here. This is the narrative project summary. So this is going to be how you are going to tell the reviewers of the proposal what your project is. You're going to include all the important stuff, all the objectives, activities, outcomes, who your team member is, background on the project, if it's part of a larger project, for example, how long it will take, the match type and description. You can include some more information here. So this is really how you're going to talk about your project in a concise and straightforward way. It is a 1,000-word limit here. So include all the important stuff, permitting status, open science tools that you might use, partnerships that you might be using in this project, and really sort of this is how you sell your project here in this narrative section. Moving down, yeah, and there's more information in the scope of work instructions as well in the RFP. So moving down to the next section, these are the project phases. In TBERF, we allow up to 6 different phases of the project. So if you do that chronologically, That would be kind of every 6 months. At the end of a phase is when you can seek reimbursement for whatever the TBRF budget is for that phase. You don't have to show matching documentation until the very end, but you're welcome to show it throughout the phases as well. There are multiple different elements to each phase. So below here, you've got the timeline, the TBRF budget, the match budget, measurable benefits, deliverables, and description. Each of those things are required for each phase that you have outlined in your application. So if you just have one phase, you're going to wrap everything up and do it all at once and seek reimbursement at the end. That's great. That makes it easier for everybody. If you want to do it in 6 phases, that's totally okay too. Just make sure that the timeline, budget, both TBRF and match budget, the measurable benefits, deliverables, and description are there for each phase that you include in your application. Yeah, and this part that I'm highlighting, provide appropriate detail. This is, it's going to be clear from the measurable benefits, hopefully, and the deliverables, what you're going to be doing in that phase and from the title. But provide any supporting information. Tell us a little background, give more description, maybe detail the deliverables, how they might look, who's doing what. For instance, if you're using open science tools, what platform are you going to be using? So just provide enough detail here for the reviewers to really see what you're trying to do. And then the next section here is budget, obviously a really important part for your grant proposal. There is, we do want the budget embedded in your scope of work, but if you want to use a spreadsheet to fill out your budget and then copy it into your scope of work, that's totally fine. We have linked a spreadsheet here that you can use. Please do use this template though. Don't forget to the TBRF expense category or the match type or the completion date or whatever. Make sure that all of this information is included there. And yeah, and use the template. I already said that. Obviously, make sure that your TBRF budget and your match budget matches what you put in the phases above as well. The math should math at the end of it. There are many instructions for the budget included in the RFP. Please read those thoroughly. If you have any questions about that before you submit, give me a call, shoot me an email, but make sure you read those budget instructions. There's a lot of details there that you want to make sure you're using when you submit your proposal, when you're drafting your proposal. And going on down, I'm just reading my mind here. Here we go. Okay, so we're at the attachment section. You should, in this section here of your scope of work, describe what's being attached. Basically, what you're welcome to submit whatever you think is needed as supporting documentation. Do not throw the kitchen sink out there, but do include whatever you think is important for the reviewers to have to assess your project. So that could be maps or photos of the project area. It could be copies of permits that you've already gotten or permit applications. If there's a strategic plan of the city or county, for instance, that is relevant for the project, you can include that, the relevant portion as well. So just describe here in the scope of work what you've included as supporting documentation, why you've included it, and then you're going to attach it at the end, and I'll show you how to do that too. As you're thinking about supporting documentation, so back to the required, the cover letter is required, the scope of work is required, supporting documentation is optional. Include what's necessary, but keep in mind that the reviewers, we're all busy professionals. You don't want to put a ton of stuff in there that they have to wade through. So yeah, just use your judgment there. And that's the end of that. Okay. Let's talk about those benefits, those measurable benefits versus deliverables, because this can be a little bit confusing. So really what you want to think of with these measurable benefits, it's what is that benefit? of your project to the environment, to the resource, or to the community? And what's the metric that you're going to use to gauge that by? Is it acres? Is it um, number of open science tools that you're going to create, or whatever it is? And then the deliverable is how you demonstrate that measurable benefit has been achieved. So the benefit is the number, the thing, and the deliverable is how you're going to show that benefit. There's a ton of examples in the RFP, so we'll just look at a couple of them now. An example is of a measurable benefit is 200 acres of forested freshwater wetland habitat restored. The deliverable for that would be permits, as-built plans, before and after photos, assessment reports, maybe one or two of those or all of the above, whatever is most appropriate to for your project. Another example of a measurable benefit are 10 stormwater best management practice BMPs installed. And what you might use as a deliverable are as-built plans, before and after photos, statement of nutrient load reduction, whatever is appropriate for a deliverable for that benefit. The last example is maybe the benefit is for public workshops held where you receive feedback from people, you disseminate information, whatever that workshop might look like. The deliverable would be sign-in sheets, a copy of your presentation, a report of the feedback that you generated during that meeting, or agendas, whatever, again, is most appropriate. So those are, oh, and there's more. Sea level rise prediction tool published to an open science repository. That's a benefit to the resource managers. And you could include the source code, the DOI link, marketing and outreach plan for that tool as deliverables for that tool. So there are tons of examples in the RFP. If you're not sure, reach out sooner than later, and we can work through your questions about this. So lastly, about how to apply, you're going to take all the stuff we just talked about, you're going to combine it into one PDF, and that's what you're going to attach in the portal when you submit your proposal. Make sure to use this naming convention so we can keep all your stuff straight. And there is a 30 megabyte limit when you are submitting all this stuff. So keep that in mind. Don't put gigantic graphics. You're not going to be able to submit it. Make sure it's reduced to the right size. So at the estuary program, we use TBRF sort of strategically to make sure that we're making progress on things that are important in the watershed. So, for instance, well, we're going to talk about the for instances, but these are pulled directly from the CCMP that I mentioned earlier or the Habitat Master Plan. It does not mean that these are the only projects that will be funded. It just means that we're particularly interested in seeing project proposals that address these priorities. So these are priorities, but they are not the only thing that you can submit. And there are 3 of them this year. So the first one here is a research priority for bay habitats. I'm circling it here so you can see that it is embedded in the CCMP. It is assess the effectiveness, functionality, and cumulative effects of mitigation and restoration projects within the watershed, especially for freshwater wetlands. So that's priority number 1. Number 2, which is the BH1 or Bay Habitats 1, protect native habitats through acquisition and restoration to help meet 2030 targets adopted in the Habitat Master Plan. You'll recall that funding habitat protection and restoration is one of the main goals of TBRF. So here we're calling it out specifically, these habitat types, because we really need your attention as resource managers to these high importance, high priority habitat types. Forested freshwater wetlands, native uplands, salt marshes, coastal uplands, and tidal tributaries are all falling behind the goals that we have collectively, all of us, agreed upon in the region in the most recent Habitat Master Plan. So I strongly encourage you to consider your options for acquisition, protection, or restoration of these habitats that are within your purview. And last but not least, the third funding priority is a combination of 2 CCMP goals, the Stormwater Runoff 1 and 10, implement best practices for stormwater runoff reduction and stormwater treatment in urban environments. Again, water quality improvement is the other top priority for funding for TBRF. So when you refer to the CCMP goal within your TBRF application, which is required, remember, be very direct. Literally put this BH1, SW10, research and monitoring priority XYZ or whatever it is. Make sure you're being very express about what you're addressing. So, quick question, temperature check. If you plan to submit a proposal for one or more of these funding priorities, please put a plus sign into the chat. This is just for my benefit. You're not committing to anything. If you're not sure, but you might address one of these funding priorities, put a question mark into the chat. And I can't see the chat for some reason, but I'm sure you're doing it. Let me find that. Cool. Okay. Again, plus if you think you'll address one, question mark if you might or you're not sure. Cool. Okay. Onward. This is the anticipated timeline for the 2026 TBRF proposal, evaluation, and project implementation. Proposals are due March 25th by 5 p.m. Do not forget to submit in advance of that, not at 4:45, before then. And we will potentially submit requests for additional information to applicants around April. In approximately June, projects will be awarded. That will go through approval of our review team, our executive director, and our two boards. And then in September is the soft deadline for getting contracts executed and for projects to get started. That is a little flexible. Then within 3 years from the start date, or approximately September 2029, your project has to be finished. So that's the timeline that you're looking at. The last thing to talk about is how your proposal is going to be evaluated. Reviewers will be using the criteria that's detailed in the RFP. I'm not going to read all of this verbatim, but I recommend that you score your own project through the lens of these criteria, or maybe even ask a colleague who's unfamiliar with your project to score your proposal through these criteria. So you know sort of where the weak points are, what you might need to explain better in your narrative, in your scope of work, for example. So yeah, just score yourself and see how it goes. So the first section of the scoring is project approach. It is the most valuable scoring section. What is your project? What are you proposing? How will the work be carried out and by whom? Does the proposal address all of the eligibility criteria? Is the intent, is the implementation, the activities, the final products, the outcomes, is all of that clearly detailed? And remember that TBRF is a deliverable-based grant. So what will the specific benefits to the watershed be? How will you measure those benefits? And what are the deliverables to demonstrate those benefits? And if I say benefits one more time, I'm going to scream. So I'm going to keep going. Relate your work to the CCMP and the HMP. Keep in mind that the estuary program has funded more than 30 years of restoration research and education, and even beyond that, partners have done even more. The best proposals are going to demonstrate a familiarity with the existing relevant tools, the research, the projects that have previously been supported, and projects, tools, etc., that exist with our partners as well. We have a digital library with a wealth of information, and there are other such resources from cities, counties, agencies, etc., in the watershed. And your project should address other important priorities like building an open science ethos into all of your work products or engaging the community. So think about all of these things with your project approach and make sure that you're communicating that clearly and concisely so it's easy for the review team to know what you're doing. Remember that TBRF is a fixed cost reimbursement style grant based on deliverables, and it requires 100% match. The typical $25,000 to $250,000 TBRF award per project is a little bit of money, but not quite a lot of bit of money. It's intended to incentivize like forward thinking, cost-effective projects, maybe adding that cherry on top of an existing really great project that's going on. So cost effectiveness and consistency in the funding request across the application is super, super important. There are tools available for comparing your project costs to industry standards. I was clicking through a few of them. Some of the links I had in here earlier were no longer working. So if you are curious, I will search for them and send them to you. But one is the International Stormwater BMP database. The EPA has a few that you can look at. So it's helpful to just look at how much is the cost of the project that you're proposing, and how does that compare to what other people are paying for investing in for the same kind of project. You might even include a reference to those tools, especially if your project demonstrates a really good return on investment that could help your proposal. And it also shows that you've done your homework when you're pricing out this project as well. There are also past TBRF projects, descriptions and the funding amounts on the TBRF website, so you can kind of see how your project aligns with past TBRF awards over the years. Your project team should include experts who are capable of completing the proposed tasks, whether that be engineers, botanists, researchers, social scientists, etc. Projects that have a specific location should engage the local community and include representatives from those communities whenever possible. Those responsible for providing matching support and long-term operation and maintenance responsibilities for the project should also be included on the project team. Think about land managers or contractors for restoration work or, whatever's most relevant. Building new relationships or enhancing existing relationships in an innovative way will increase the strength of your application, especially when that leads to better project outcomes or sustainability of the project, or when it engages underserved or overburdened communities. And we do have definitions for underserved and overburdened communities that we use in our equity strategy. Maya, I forgot to include that link, but if you want to get the equity strategy, the tool, and put it in the chat, that would be great. But we're open to other definitions if there's another way that you're defining these communities too. Lastly, the innovative section, developing an approach that extends the project or outcome beyond the life of the grant is another way to set your proposal apart. Can others use the methods that you developed as a model? Can your work be easily replicated, incorporated into a baseline understanding of the watershed? Does the proposal build upon completed work, or is it a portion of a larger project? The project could advance a new or innovative approach, such as tackling an emerging issue or applying novel technology. It could help Bay management practitioners sort of reach beyond the choir to grow partners in the restoration world or to expand the pool of environmental stewards or restoration professionals. So think about different ways that you might be innovative within your project. And I mentioned open science a couple times. If you're not familiar with the term, the basic open science principles are fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable for data, and following tidy data formats such as having metadata, having transparent workflows, sharing them on a web repository that's available publicly, for example. There's a really handy SOP for this that, we at the estuary program wrote, and it's really lovely. Some of this language will be included in the contract for TBRF once we get to that point. So it's best to plan in advance how you'll adhere to open science principles if you are going to have data within your project. And Maya will add that in the chat as well. Okay, so I just talked a lot. So we're at the Q&A portion. We had a few questions that were submitted through the portal, so I will go over those first. While I'm doing that, I can see there's a lot happening in the chat, so we'll go through that afterward. And then if you didn't get your question in the chat, just come off mute at the very end. Okay. So question number 1 that was submitted, can the TBRF funding be used to fill gaps in funding for an existing project? They have an appropriation that covers a portion, and TBRF funding would be helpful to complete that project. Yes, TBER funding can be used to fully implement an existing project. And sometimes it's nice to see that TBERF is adding to something that is bigger than TBERF. So it can be helpful to show that, we have like whatever 70% of the funding, TBERF would contribute 30%, whatever it is. So just demonstrate that in both your budget and your narrative. Can existing secured grant funds for the initial phase of the project on which we're requesting TBER funding for additional oyster habitat units be used as a match? Match contributed up to 1 year prior to submission of the proposal can be used as match, and that can include secured funds for the initial phases of the project. Maya, is there anything you want to add to any of these as I'm going through, or are you good for?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the all of
Oh,
the chats in the
okay. Yeah.
direct messages and stuff, so you're good.
Okay. Number three, is there a particular cover letter template available to be used? There is no template. Just like I said earlier, make sure that the sort of head honcho of whatever your organization is the one that's providing that and saying that you have permission, authority to apply for this grant and to carry out the project if it is awarded. Are links for background information appropriate? They are allowed, but I'm going to go back to what I was saying earlier about supporting documentation. Don't throw the kitchen sink out here. This is not the time for that. If it's something that's super relevant, like for instance, I can think of like a strategic plan might be relevant, but maybe just include the one page that's most relevant from that strategic plan instead of the link to a 50-page document, for example. So be specific. It's allowed, but use your judgment. Since match funds contributed up to 1 year prior to submission of the proposal may be included, can matching funds be spent on project activities, such as planning activities, prior to the start of the 2026 TBERF grant? If so, should the timeline reflect that the entire project starts prior to September, October 2026? So match expended up to 1 year prior to the submission until the completion of the awarded TBERF project may be used as match. So yes. Is there a limit of backup documents in the PDF other than the 30 megabyte size limit? No, there is no additional limit for supporting documentation, but I'm going to say it again, not the kitchen sink, just the stuff that's relevant. The reviewers will be instructed to evaluate the required proposal materials. If you provide, frankly, 100 pages of supporting documentation and that fits in your 30 megabyte limit, um, it's going to be, we're going to make sure that the scope of work, the cover letter, the required documentations are thoroughly reviewed, but 100 pages of backup material is way too much to provide. There's no limit. I'm not telling you you can't, but I'm telling you that's not a good idea. So,
I'll just add in here that the reviewers will be scoring based off of those required materials. So if your scope of work does not provide details that you are including with those optional supporting documentation, it won't really help your overall score. It might help provide some context if the reviewer is able to make it through all of that information, but your overall score will be based on those required materials, like your scope of work.
thank you for that. Yeah. I think this is the last question. Would it be possible to house data and analyses on TBER's GitHub site? So yes, it is possible for TBERF data and analyses to be hosted as a repository on our TBEP Tech organization within GitHub. We will not assume responsibility for managing that data. So yes, it's possible, but this is something you want to work out well in advance. I definitely don't encourage you to throw that into your scope of work without talking to us first, because we definitely want to make sure we're on the same page with that before agreeing to it. Okay, that was all the questions submitted in advance. Let's go to the chat. And I can see, Maya, that you're typing furiously. So I'm gonna scroll up and see if there's any.
There's
Should we?
definitely a couple questions about match that people have. One about indirect and how to think about indirect costs, and then one to know what kind of in-kind might services might qualify as in-kind match.
Okay, so we can start with in-kind match. There's many different ways that you can show match and in-kind match, including volunteer time, uh, acquisition of land, for example. So is it more specific? How do I answer this more specifically?
I
Um,
think it would be really helpful for the question typers to come off mute and ask their question more specifically with what they have in mind.
yeah, so what I'm gonna do is stop sharing my screen so we can see each other and I can actually see y'all. Um, and yeah, if you want to come off mute, if we get more than a couple people, maybe raise your hand and I can help moderate that a little bit better. Um, but yeah, whoever had the in-kind question.
Hey, Jessica, it's Rebecca. Yeah, I was the one with the in-kind question. We had that conversation a couple of weeks ago when we were looking, when Bonnet Springs Park was looking at um, how to match, even though our budgets have already been completed. And so one of the questions that came up was the idea of in-kind. And I didn't really see anything in the guidelines that made it very clear as to what would qualify as in-kind. So I figured that was one of the reasons I came to this meeting, was to kind of get a better idea. So you said volunteer time. What about things that would be related to the project itself that we would be working, I don't know, like security or insurance for that site or the work, any of that stuff?
So if you're talking about like staff salary, for example, that
Yeah.
is a match type that's not in kind though, but that is a direct match that you can use, that you can
But
count.
that would be like direct match, and we can't go over like 15%, correct? Is it 15?
There's no
No.
limit on direct match. If
Okay.
if 100% direct match is great.
Okay.
Match does have to be voluntary in nature, so it cannot come from, for example, a consent order or something like that. But
Right.
halftime, yeah, that would totally count.
Okay.
And there are, I'll draw your all's attention to the budget instructions in the RFP. There are expense categories there, contractual, salaries and benefits, equipment, et cetera, et cetera. Almost everything is going to fall under contractual or salaries.
Okay.
So it's unlikely that you'll have, not unlikely, it's less likely that you'll have things from other categories. Um, so yeah, if you have questions specific about that, anyone, feel free to reach out.
I
Thank
have
you.
the
Let me go
question.
back on mute.
Oh, I have the question specifically about documentation of match. So if
Okay.
we're going back a whole year, including largely staff salary working on the project, what are like examples of the documentation that we would need to kind of prove that we contributed that?
Yeah, we're pretty flexible on how you can document match for the project. So if there's a report that you can pull from your accounting, for example, or um, yeah, any sort of tracking that you have for hours, any documentation that shows that is official documentation of what you're demonstrating as match almost certainly works for us. If you're not sure, let me know and I can review it and let you know this actually needs to be on letterhead or like you're not providing enough detail or like whatever it is. But we're quite flexible on how you can demonstrate match.
So I'll just jump in here and add that you are documenting match after you have been awarded a TBRF contract, and along the way, then as you are completing portions of the project, you're not needing to document the match itself for your proposal. You'll want to identify what kind of information you'll be, what type of match you'll be providing, whether it's cash or in kind. If it's from things like a land purchase, an equipment purchase, staff time, volunteer time. Those are details that you'll want to address in your proposal, but you're not required to provide that documentation until after you have successfully been awarded a contract for your project. And in the case of something like staff time, as Jessica mentioned, things like your timesheets, your payroll proof of payment, those are the kinds of documents that we'll be looking for to substantiate that kind of match claim.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification of when you need to provide that documentation. Were there other questions about in-kind or match?
Think the next question I saw about sort of the finance side of things was a question about the indirect cost rate for the proposal. And then the question asker had a follow-up with some alphabet soup. So I was hoping that they would come off mute and clarify what they're asking. This was T King.
T, are you here
Here
and
they don't have a mic. Maybe if you could type out your question in a little more detail about what the acronyms you're using would help us answer.
total federal funds awarded, total direct costs?
So keep in mind that for the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, the majority of these funds are not federal. They're almost never federal in nature. And so I'm not quite sure. Again, this is just going to be a 10% of the total award for the T-Birth project. So I'm not sure the extent to which total direct costs versus total federal funding awarded would matter there.
T, if you want to let us know if that answers your question or if you want to provide more direction on what you're looking for. And if total direct cost is the direct cost less indirect cost. So the 10% indirect cost limit is of the T-Birth budget, period. I don't know if that's helping.
Of the total funds that are awarded for T-Birth. Um, yes. And then I think AJ's asked a follow-up question, if I'm understanding it correctly. Your total ask for T-Birth, your total budget should be inclusive of any indirect that you are claiming. And again, I would just sort of encourage people. I know that some of you work for institutions that, require you to recover indirect costs, but these are relatively small awards. The intent is for us to fund direct costs associated with research and restoration priorities. So we spend quite a bit of time dealing with the minutia of indirect costs and how to sort of capitalize on that. It is our preference to support projects where the majority of the funds are going to support the direct on the ground work or research. And if you're able to convey those messages to your business lines accordingly, that would be very much appreciated by us.
Yeah, and I'll be maybe more direct about indirect and say that it's generally the least competitive type of match. It is allowed, but like Maya's saying, we certainly want to direct TBER funds directly towards the work. So keep that in mind. If there's other ways that you can demonstrate match, highly encouraged to do so. And Priscilla, you're here, so just come off mute and ask. For the benefit of future
Thank you,
recording
Jessica.
watchers.
Okay,
Yeah.
so as I wrote it, as I'm understanding it, just to recap very basic, the in-kind match is generally the volunteers, and a direct match would be salary, and of course the cash match would be like the organization, if it's a city, what they contribute out of their funding for a beautification match, or whatever their budget is.
Mhm.
And all of those are still calculated at $33 an hour, or do I have to? And is that correct with, and $33 an hour across the board for volunteers as well as staff salary, or do I need to get in there and pull their paychecks?
If staff salary should count at what their rate is, what the actual rate is for them.
Okay.
The volunteer valuation per hour is pulled from a national database. I
Okay.
think $33 per hour is the current most recent um, rate for the state of Florida because they break it down by state. And then I think like the national is like 31.50 or something per hour. So if you can find a valuation that is different and link it and it's, a valid source, then you're welcome to use that. But the one that we use is the national one.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
And then the in-kind match is generally just volunteers, or would that also say, for instance, somebody donated, shore plants or something, would that be able to be calculated as an in-kind match?
It definitely would count as match, depending on how it's given to you. It could be in kind or it could be supplies maybe depending on what it is if it's donated, so that might be specific to your project and we can talk about it, so whether it's being donated directly or just the value of it or the cash, like however it's being donated, I think matters how you put it as in what category it's in. It still counts as match
But
kind
we
of.
just have to determine where it
Right.
goes in that. So TBD. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Take myself off.
And if you are here and we haven't answered your question yet from the chat, please go ahead and come off mute so we don't miss you.
There's definitely a few more questions in the chat that are more substantive in nature. I can try running through them.
If
There's
you
a
don't
question.
mind, because I feel like I'm getting lost in the chat now.
I'm definitely getting lost in the chat too.
Okay.
I think I'll just sort of go through what's in the chat just for the benefit of everyone on the recording. There is a question in here about how to structure the scope of work, how much written overlap should there be between the project narrative and the project phase language. As one of the reviewers and scorers for this, my preference is for the project narrative to be sort of an overview, your pitch for your project, so people should understand the overall context of why you're, doing this thing or trying to answer this question, with a high level sort of structure of your phases of your project. But then the details of each project phase should be within the phase description itself. So I'd prefer for there not to be like a lot of redundancy between them, but one should be sort of setting the stage for the subsequent more deeper dive. Then there's a question about the stormwater treatment priority and whether or not there's a particular contaminant of concern for TBRF and whether or not microplastics are still of interest. And my response there is basically that any action or contaminant that's identified in the CCMP is eligible for TBRF and is therefore encouraged. Letting people know that there's a slight scoring bonus for one of those things that are identified as the priorities that Jessica listed here today. And that just reminding everybody that for Tampa Bay Estuary Program partners and the CCMP in general, nitrogen is the primary contaminant of concern for Tampa Bay, but there are others as well. If you're just kind of looking for our perspective, that doesn't necessarily mean that we wouldn't support research on some of these other things we have, and we'll continue to support research on other contaminants as well. Jim Bays, I don't know if you want to come off mute and give a little context to your question.
Hey, thank you, Maya. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Uh, yeah, so the question, as I say, is that we've got a project, stormwater treatment project. We're looking at adding a vendor product, and actually there's a couple things we're looking at that would enhance, we think, the nitrogen reduction or nitrogen processing. But it's just a pilot. thought. It's a thought about a pilot system right now, given the expense for a full-scale system. We're talking about implementing this in a component of the system we're working in, and we think we can create a controlled experiment there. Um, but we might not like the results, but this is something that could be applicable to other stormwater treatment systems in the watershed. So the question is, would TBER funding be applicable or for that, even though we don't know that it's part of a full-time, permanent installation?
Yeah, I think my answer is that TBERF is a great source of funding to sort of pilot test this kind of new technologies. This is a place where we're a little less risk averse and are open to those sorts of experimental questions. And then we would just sort of, urge you to structure your project so that you weren't sort of promising, a stormwater treatment system that would be there in perpetuity, but you would be clear that this is a demonstration and pilot testing application with measurable benefits and deliverables that are more like a study design, and then a set of recommendations for whether or not to include this type of system and in what contexts.
Yeah, that's the thinking here. Is there would be definitely a research gain, a knowledgeability gain within the area. So thanks. I think it does answer my question. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. In the chat, I see Aldo's asked a question about whether or not one a proposal should link to other objectives in the CCMP if they're not one of the three funding priorities mentioned earlier. We want to emphatically say yes. It is critical that you provide a linkage to the CCMP for your project, regardless of whether or not it's one of the three priorities. Anything that's in the CCMP is eligible for TBER funding, and you do need to make reference to that directly. Let's see. Anthony's asked a question about how many projects we'll be awarding. I think Jessica mentioned that we have about $800,000 to award. We don't know how many projects that will be. It'll be the best ones. So if we get one $800,000 idea, it could just be one project. More likely, it'll be somewhere between, let's say, 3 to 8 projects.
Don't say that. Don't.
The cross to bear.
Yeah.
Um, so I see Melinda is asking a question about whether or not we have references for where we can find out more compliance related information, such as how money is spent, like purchasing supplies and equipment. I would, Melinda, encourage you to make sure if you haven't already reviewed the budget instructions. There's quite a bit of detail about those things in the budget instructions that Jessica has linked and provided. I'll also say again, we recognize this amount of money. It's not inconsequential, but it's much smaller than many other grant programs, especially federal grant programs. So we pride ourselves in having just the right amount of red tape, not too much, not too little. And so I think there's somewhat more flexibility here. It might be good for you to schedule a follow-up call with Jessica directly. Jessica, maybe you want to take AJ's question. Do you ever play matchmaker if you see overlap in projects?
Yeah. I mean, especially if you are, um, I don't know how I didn't mention this until now, so I apologize, but you are welcome to send me your draft application in advance of submitting it. So I meant to say that earlier. I hope everyone is still here. Um, Keep in mind you've got about what, like 6 weeks until proposals are due, so you should send a draft to me ASAP so that I can have time to review it and get some input and send it back to you, make updates as needed, and then you submit it on time still. So yeah, especially in the early parts of sort of planning and proposal, playing matchmaker is my favorite job. I love setting you guys up to do work together and be even more effective. If you, for instance, submit a proposal and it seems like a great proposal, but perhaps there's like a key sort of person on the team that we or the reviewers feel is not on that team. We might recommend, for example, we might ask in the request for additional information, like, hey, have you considered adding, for instance, a social scientist to your team or whomever kind of professional So that's something we could ask. But if you are interested in finding partnerships, reach out to me sooner than later. And that is something that we kind of help facilitate throughout the year is getting people working together that could do good work together. So AJ for sure.
And you've
Um,
got Susan offering up workforce support from the Conservation Corps, from AmeriCorps, which is awesome. And just to clarify, for those not seeing the chat, if you want to send your application in early for that kind of review that Jessica so graciously offered for, just email her directly. Her email is jlewis@tvep.org.
yeah, and I will always try to get feedback to you, but I will not make any guarantees if it's like a week or two before that application. So don't press your luck, but the sooner you get it to me, the better. And that includes like you can send me like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Here's 5 sentences on an idea. Do you think it's worth putting a proposal together? I'll answer that, to the best of my ability and talk with others at the Estuary program. Or you can send a fully like full draft and either way. So we've got a few minutes left, but any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right, y'all. I appreciate you coming. I really hope to see your application in the near future. I look forward to working with y'all, and please reach out if you have questions that are specific to your project. Thanks for coming today.